Welcome to Cathedral Talk. While our podcast's mission is to support the restoration efforts to save Notre-Dame de Paris, today we're putting Zach and David on furlough, and instead I have the special privilege to interview Joe Alonso, the head stonemason at Washington National Cathedral, to which we dedicate this episode. Welcome. We have a special day on our podcast for Cathedral Talk today, where I've got with me the head mason at Washington National Cathedral, Joe Alonso. I believe, Joe, you've been working here since the end of the construction of the cathedral. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, 1985, we were actually working on the final phase of construction of the West Towers. So from 85 to 90, we were still constructing and, of course, completed the towers in 1990.
If I remember correctly, those towers, we weren't even sure they were going to be able to build them up until that last decade when they finally raised the funds to complete the whole cathedral.
Exactly, yeah. It wasn't until the early, mid-'80s that they knew by then, at that point, that they could get the funding to complete them. And that's why I arrived here. They were able to augment the crew. You know, they hired another stonemason like me and more stone carvers, and yeah, that was the final push.
Of course, the biggest news item that's been in the Washington Post and really for the last decade about the cathedral has been the 2011 earthquake that happened on August 23rd. I was actually a school teacher teaching in a classroom when the earthquake struck, and I felt the tremors at 1:51 p.m., and I had never been in an earthquake before, but when I felt them, I was like, this is very unusual. And the TVs were shaking, the desks were shaking, and I was screaming at the kids, get onto the tables. It was the second day of school, so I didn't know anybody's names. But then once we all got into the tables, I thought, oh, geez, I hope the cathedral's okay.
Oh, wow.
As the damage was appraised after the earthquake happened, I was surprised to find out that Washington National Cathedral seemed to sustain a lot more damage than a lot of the other buildings in the area. For example, the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, the Catholic Basilica, which is also built out of Indiana limestone, actually seemed, from what I could tell, came out relatively unscathed.
Yeah, I think their tower, that spire tower, whatever you call it, sustained some damage.
Yeah.
But the shrine did okay. But, you know, it's not a full-on solid load-bearing masonry structure like this. The shrine actually has a steel
Does it really?
frame, and the limestone.
See, I didn't know that. That's great.
I mean, it's still a very solid masonry building, but it has that inner structure of steel.
Yeah.
And the stonework, even though it's big stonework, it's still like a veneer.
Right.
So it behaved differently than this real Gothic structure.
Because the Washington National Cathedral was built to follow the real principles of medieval engineering.
Correct. It is a solid load-bearing masonry structure. We've got, you know, the limestone, heavy limestone walls, the flying buttresses, the pinnacles. Those are all doing what they're supposed to do. We have a lot of brick also in the building, which is totally normal. I mean, a medieval cathedral would have had rubble, kind of, a rubble wall, a rubble fill in the walls, whereas since it is a 20th century building, lots of brick and concrete.
I was actually going to ask you about the concrete coming up in a little bit. So in general, though, Washington National Cathedral did seem to sustain some of the most damage in the area, and today the work is still continuing. It's been 11 years now, and how many more years do you think we have to go?
Well, again, depends on how the money comes in. You know, we're 11 years in, and we're a little more than halfway done. That's how it's worked out thus far. You know, we've sustained about $38 million worth of damage. And we've got about 12 million to go, right? Is my math correct?
Actually, I've got the Washington Post article right here that just came out.
Yeah, that last one, yeah.
According to
Something.
September 26th, the cathedral had raised, I guess, 115 million altogether.
Well, that's the capital campaign and all that. That's for all of the programs. But the earthquake chunk, I believe, was It
wasn't very clear in the article.
yeah. The article makes it sound like, we've got 115 million for earthquake and the earthquake. But that's that capital campaign number.
Yeah, there's a lot more going on here than just reconstruction.
Exactly. But our chunk is supposedly 38 million in damage.
Yeah.
12 more to go. So based on that, if we're a little more than halfway, I could see us at this another 7-8 years or whatever.
Definitely. So we'll talk about some of the particular projects that you've been working on over the years so far. Before we get to that, though, I had a question about keeping track of damage on the cathedral. In particular, there, of course, are already just natural cracks that formed before the earthquake versus, again, you have much bigger cracks that happened after the earthquake. How do you keep track of which cracks are significantly vulnerable versus other cracks that don't matter so much?
Yeah. I mean, not just cracks, just the damage that we observe. But so you're correct. The cathedral has undergone structural settlement, differential settlement over the years, probably since the beginning of its construction. You could walk on the far east end of the building over the vaulting or just observe, cracking and movement that started probably, like I said, very early on.
There's one, I think there's a big crack right over the central square above the overcroft that I think I heard somewhere that they keep track of as their motion over many years.
Yeah, we have these telltales, these motion sensors.
Yeah.
They're basically two steel pins fixed on blocks over the crack, and they're gapped. And we use feeler gauges, literally, to check. And it's interesting because the biggest area of movement on the cathedral, this is prior to the earthquake, is on the west end.
Oh, really?
The west towers.
The newest side.
The newest side, where the west towers join the nave. You walk in the west doors.
Okay.
And I can even show you on the marble floor.
Okay.
As you walk in, there at the beginning of the nave, the western end of the nave, you'll see a crack in the marble floor that runs along one of the joints. But, you think about the cathedral was built in sections.
Yes.
Right? Over the decades, over the 83 years. First, they built the apse, the far east end. Then they built the choir. And then they went north with the north transept. But I always think of the cathedral, it is one building, one structure. But if you look at all the different parts of the cathedral, the north transept, the south transept, the choir, the nave, the west towers, it's really several structures joined together.
It's multiple buildings almost just attached.
It is. Multiple buildings joined together. As they constructed them, they joined them together. The cathedral sits on a massive poured concrete foundation.
Okay.
But even that foundation, it's kind of interesting. That foundation was pretty much built, even the footprint of the cathedral, you can look at the old photos.
Yeah.
Throughout the 1920s, they were pretty much building the choir.
Yes.
But at the same time, they were digging and pouring all of the concrete foundations all the way to the west.
Prevent other people from building something there.
The footprint of the cathedral by 1930 was there.
Really?
The footprint was there.
I did not know it was that early.
Yes.
That's only 23 years from the very beginning of the cornerstone.
It was just what went into digging and pouring all that concrete. I look at the drawings, I look at photographs, and it's mind-blowing. So anyway, by 1930, the footprint of the building was there, even though the only thing that was finished was the apse and the choir, and then, they started building the north transept. So all over those decades, they just started building on top of those foundations. But the west towers, it's kind of interesting. The footings, the foundations for the west towers were actually built for the first version of the west towers.
The shorter, stubbier ones.
Right. We had the original design of the cathedral was designed by the two British architects, George Bodley and Henry Vaughan. But by the end of the 1920s, they were both dead. And that's when actually, I think 1921, Philip Frohman took over as cathedral architect, and he remained the cathedral architect for 50 years until he died in the early 70s.
Oh, geez.
So the cathedral that we see today is actually refined or changed somewhat by Frohman. If you look at the Bodley and Vaughan design, the only part of the cathedral that's the Bodley-Vaughan design is the apse and the choir. When Frohman took over, he tweaked Bodley and Vaughan's design. But the biggest tweak, I think, was the west towers. He made them taller, wider, bigger. That little northwest wing that sticks out at the bottom and the rare book wing on the south were added afterward. But basically, those towers are sitting on the original foundations that were meant to support the Bodley and Vaughan towers. And then when these west towers started construction in the late 1960s, early 70s, they added concrete. From what I gather, we had a lot of studies done on this, and they added concrete. They stepped out on top of those footings. And then when they built the northwest wing and the rare book wing, they just built two little foundations for those and just kind of attached them to the west towers. But anyway, as these towers were being built, starting in 1970, and, we finished them in 1990, all that weight being added, settlement occurred. And it's not unusual.
Oh, it's very normal. Notre-Dame incurred settlement where its whole western facade started to tilt forward.
Exactly. That's not unusual. And we started seeing it. I remember in the mid to late 80s, as we were moving along with the West Tower construction, our architect at the time, and you can still see it in the northwest wing and in the rare book wing, as these towers went up and up and up, and we're pushing down and settling these little wings that were built. Because, the Northwest Wing and the Rare Book Wing were built in the mid-60s. You've seen the photos, right?
Yeah.
You see those two little wings sticking out, and then there's no towers, which was really clever. I think they did that because that gained you access into the building.
Yeah.
When they finished those two wings by the mid-60s, you were able to enter the cathedral through those little wings and through the outer aisles while they still built the towers up.
Right.
So I thought that was pretty clever, way of doing it. But those two little wings, you started seeing the evidence of the settlement in the piers, and you've seen them when you walk in, how they're offset. And they were moving like crazy, starting in the, like I said, late 80s. And then when we finished the cathedral in 90, throughout the 90s, we were recording movement. They just kept on those cracks and joints, and the offsetting of the piers seemed to just keep creeping and creeping. And, we were like, well, when is this going to stop? And we had a brilliant professor of engineering architecture from Princeton, Robert Mark. Robert was a great guy. His specialty was Gothic buildings. He did studies on Notre-Dame and other cathedrals. And it was Robert who came up with our monitoring program. He and I would, so basically I was doing this from the early 90s through the early 2000s. We would set up an optical level in the middle of the narthex at a fixed point, and the little spots are still on the walls, and I would shoot these grades. I would shoot these points once a month, and then Robert would record the data and analyze it. But what we were seeing throughout the 90s or into the 90s was still some settlement of the building. However, by the late 90s, early 2000s, the settlement was receding, stopping. And what we would see also then is thermal movement. And there's other areas in the building. If you know, like when you're down here in the overcroft of the tower where the nave joins, right? You see that crack?
Yes.
In the floor that we kind of filled with caulk. And you've got another one south transept side. You've got another one north transept side. So again, where these four buildings join together, right? I call the south transept there's churches smaller than transept.
So far so.
Yeah. So we would monitor all of that.
Yeah.
And what we were finding out that by the early 2000s on the west end, the settlement of the towers dramatically stopped. And what we were seeing then was just thermal movement. So in the warm weather, the cracks And our little elevation points would reflect the fact that the masonry heated up in the warm weather and expanded, so the cracks would get tighter. In the cold weather, in the winter, they would contract and the cracks would get bigger. And we would notice variations in the gaps, as much as 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch from winter to summer.
That's considerable.
But the good thing is, like I said, it went back.
Yeah.
In the winter,
Yeah.
it opens up. In the summer, it tightens up. And as long as it keeps doing that,
Yeah.
according to Robert, and, it kind of makes sense. I mean, I'm no engineer, but, the building, I think the West Towers have found where they want to be. We no longer do the monthly monitoring. I do it about 3 times a year,
Right.
But not as intense.
Yeah.
But yeah, the building is I would say it kind of found where it wants to be.
Well, and when the earthquake happens, did that shift anything in the foundations, or is it all stuff on the top?
Oh, pretty much on the top. I mean, when that earthquake hit, when that seismic action took place through the ground, again, this building is on such a massive footing foundation that sustained no damage, and neither did the structure of the building. It's not like we had cracks running through the walls of the building. It's not like the arches collapsed. I mean, the structure, the building absorbed the energy quite well, although being a Gothic cathedral, a Gothic building with all these pinnacles and finials and buttresses and all these slender architectural elements up high. So that energy, I mean, look where we're sitting right now here in the tower.
Oh, yeah.
Although I do remember these little windows actually buckled in some areas. You see?
The glass sort of
And actually, the glass, we did get some broken glass in these little windows.
Yep.
It's been since repaired. But again, the structure, that energy just kept on going up, 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 up. And, like the cracking of a whip.
Right.
Boom!
We're quite high up right now. So.
And and the top of this tower sustained the worst of the damage, being up 301 feet. To the top of these central tower pinnacles until we removed 16 feet of pinnacle. So hopefully we'll be back to 301 feet one day.
Well, I remember when that first ginormous crane was brought in and new scaffolding was being built on the top of the central
the structure
tower.
that's up here, the stabilization structure and the structure that's up there. It's there for stabilization and for access.
Yeah. And then the crane fell over.
And then the crane fell over. Man, oh man, oh man. Yeah, the storm came in, the crane fell over, and that was
It was amazing that it fell exactly parallel to the nave, though. So
to the road, right along South Road. If it was going to fall, it couldn't have fallen any better.
Some cars didn't roll away from that, but at least the cathedral kept going.
And no one got hurt or killed, and that's the main thing. You can fix the broken stuff, not the broken people.
So when it comes to all the work that has to be done over this last decade of repairs, how did you prioritize what had to happen first and second and third?
Oh, well, yeah. So after the earthquake, we got a hold of our engineering team, our engineers, our partners. It's a big firm, big nationwide firm here and also here in D.C., WJE, Wiss, Janey, Elsner. Great folks. But they came in and assisted with their assessment team. I mean, the building we were shut down. The building was swarming with engineers and us and others. And, we were doing a detailed survey of the building. That's pretty much what occupied us in the first weeks after the quake. It was, I call it triage. We were engaged in masonry triage.
Well, one of the first things that was done, if I remember correctly, were the flying buttresses on the apse on the east end.
Yeah, the east end buttresses. Yeah, that's interesting what happened there. The day of the quake, I was here, my colleague Andy and I were working on the west front steps. There was a little repair. We were preparing for the big 9/11, 10th anniversary of 9/11.
Yeah.
And that was coming up, and, everyone was getting, and there was, anyway, on the front steps there was a couple little areas that we wanted to re-tuck point and spruce up, and like, let's do that, get that ready for 9/11. It's only a couple of weeks away. And, that's where we were when the quake hit. When I was walking toward our truck, I had to go get something out of the shop, and I had just gotten in the truck and I heard what I thought were explosions. I was on the south side, and then Andy, my colleague, was still there on the steps in the center. But I thought I heard, this boom, boom, boom. I didn't feel the shaking because I was in the truck.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
I wasn't driving. I was just sat in it. But then I got out, and I these explosions that I heard. I don't know why I thought there's a big air conditioning condensing units on the roof of the rear book wing and on the roof of the northwest wing. And I don't know what I said, did this condenser just explode?
Right.
Your mind. And then I came back to the west end where Andy was. And then all of a sudden people start running out of the building.
Yeah.
And we were then just thinking, oh my God, earthquake. Yeah. I not a corner of my eye. I saw a couple bits. I think what I saw was.
I was going to say, did you see anything in real time? Anything like swaying? I think
what I saw out of the corner of my eye, and Andy saw it better than me, but was the one thing that fell from the west towers, one of the intermediate pinnacles, the finial came off and fell and buried itself in that little piece of lawn in front of the northwest wing. That was the single biggest piece that literally fell to the ground. I mean, we had bigger pieces fall and land on roofs and gutters and parapets. So then we were telling people to get away from the building, not knowing, I know all the slender elements that are on those west towers. So we just thought, get away from the building, get away from the building. And it lasted 58 seconds.
Right.
And then we're on the west end there on the west front going, what the,
And you've said to me before, if the earthquake had gone on for just a few more seconds.
Oh, yeah. If you go, I can talk about that with our triage. Yeah. But the immediate moment of the earthquake, again, we were on the west front. So that's what we witnessed. Mm. And then I noticed on the north lawn here is where I started noticing people standing on the north lawn and looking up and pointing. Then we walked around to the north lawn, and that's when everyone was looking up at the top of this tower.
The central tower, yeah.
The top of these pinnacles just going, what the? And then, of course, the southwest pinnacle had lost the top third of its pinnacle.
Right.
The finial and the four courses beneath it. So, a section probably 8-9 feet tall, probably a 4-ton, 5-ton section of stone. And that landed on the roof when it was shaking back and forth. So there was a crew of roofers. We had a roofing company was working on Hearst Hall that day, or that summer. They were doing work there on the gutters of Hearst Hall, and they had a scaffold. And one of the guys who I knew later, I spoke to him, but he was looking at this tower while he was up on his scaffold, shaking and shimmying. And he saw the pinnacles of this tower swaying back and forth. And he saw this southwest one cut loose.
Ugh.
And fall. And maybe that was that explosion that I heard.
Right.
The sound of the 4 or 5 tons pinnacle landing on the concrete roof.
The roof and the top of the central tower is incredibly robust, isn't it?
All of the floors of this central tower are. Yeah, you see them. I mean, they're poured in place concrete beams with a 1 foot thick concrete slab. Mm-hmm. The concrete deck in between the beams, it's not a 4-inch slab like on most buildings.
Right.
It's a 12-inch slab.
Wow.
So the pinnacle landing on that, and it could have just as easily gone the other way.
Yeah.
Had it gone the other direction, of course, it would have fallen 150 feet, probably gone through the roof of either the nave, that southwest corner of the nave, or of the south transept. It would have gone right through that because the roof planks are only 3 inches thick, lightweight concrete. And who knows? Might have gone all the way down through the vaulting.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been a 5-ton missile.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, again, nobody, fortunately, was hurt.
Right. And the folks got out of the building. And then there was, then we did a quick circuit of the building. Then around the east end. Oh, yeah, on the east end at the apse, we noticed the flying buttresses. And those are unique. The 6 freestanding buttresses around the apse. Those are unique in that the pier of the buttress is not connected to the wall.
Right.
If you look at all our other flying buttresses on this building, they're known as engaged buttresses. Mm-hmm. The piers are built into the wall, and then just the flyers come out and join the walls. Whereas the apse, you have that freestanding pier.
Yes.
with the flyers coming out and connecting to the wall. So what happened there, the freestanding pier kind of did this. It
More sway.
It swayed, pulled the flying arches like an accordion.
More stretching and compression.
Stretched them out of compression.
Yeah.
And then recompressed them.
Right.
But they broke their bond at where they hinged, and you saw the damage. And so that I immediately saw from the ground thinking, ooh, that's not good.
Well, I was going to say, this was actually one of my questions. You led right into it.
Oh, okay.
Because those freestanding buttresses, I can't think, it may exist and maybe I'm not aware of it, but I can't think of another cathedral that has freestanding buttresses like those.
I might be wrong also, but it's a very unique feature to this cathedral. And yeah, I've been to lots of cathedrals in Europe, and I've not seen that unique.
Well, and I know you're not a structural engineer, but do you think that it would have been as bad had they been more traditional and attached to the building?
I don't think they would have moved the way they did.
Yeah.
Because all of our other flying buttresses fared pretty well. I mean, we had some, I think when you were up there with me, I showed you, but the lower arch of the flyer.
Yeah.
On a few of them, they dropped 3/8 of an inch, half an inch, but they didn't crack the way the ones on the east end did.
Right.
So the engaged buttresses are all around the building actually did quite well. Now the pinnacles on top of those buttresses didn't. Again, that energy kept going up, and spun them and rotated them. And the other interesting thing, the apse flying buttresses actually, we've worked on those back in the 80s.
Oh, you had to go back.
If you go back, way back to the 1920s, the East End was completed by 1918. So those big freestanding buttresses were completed by 1918.
Very
They're
early.
probably being built in 1915, 16, 17, whatever. But there's mention in the building committee minutes from the 20s of cracking in the apse buttresses. And they were already up there, from what we can gather, doing some repairs to them. And again in the 1950s, they were up there doing work. We got up there in the 80s where those flyers were out of compression. And it's interesting, our engineer, Robert Mark, our good friend there from Princeton, back in the 80s and 90s, Robert had a theory that those apse flying buttresses may not be holding up the walls of the apse
That's
as much
going to be
as
my
you
question.
think.
Yes.
Again, me not being an engineer, but they're not, according to Robert, they've never been under that much compression.
Yeah.
It's like you could almost remove them and not need them.
Well, Washington National Cathedral is a very large cathedral. It is very long. It's got tall towers. Its nave height is actually rather modest. It's actually a little bit shorter.
Kind of middle of the road. Yeah.
It's actually a little bit shorter than Notre-Dame, and there's some debate of how much those flying buttresses are needed.
Well, I think all our other flying buttresses
probably are, yes.
Probably are, because if you look at, the whole thing about flying buttresses, right? The medieval builders figured out, the whole thing about the big stained glass windows, right? You can open up those walls, those clear story walls, and put these huge windows, and you don't have to make the walls as thick,
right? Because
you're bracing them from the exterior.
All of the windows in the apse are narrower, so
they're
you got
narrow
more stone.
And they're not as big.
Yeah.
And the walls of the apse are actually quite thick.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, but yeah, it's an interesting theory. I don't know if it's been completely fleshed out, but I always remember Robert talking about that, and the fact that they've done work on these buttresses over the years,
right?
Not even earthquake related.
Yeah,
that'd be an interesting theory for someone to pursue.
Well, so if those East End flying buttresses may not be as essential as the others, I assume then that means even though they had tremendous swaying during the earthquake, the vaults on the apse sort of hemicycle were probably not that damaged themselves.
Oh, they weren't damaged at all. And that's the other interesting thing. If you walk on top of the vaulting, of the choir, and you go all the way to the East End, the vaulting of the East End of the apse, the first vaulting that was built, it's really unique. They are massive blocks of limestone. I should take you out there one day.
Please do. I'll go on any field
Walk
trip with
above
you.
and look down. I can point out to you. Oh, and here's a little cool aside.
Yeah.
I don't know if I told you this when you were here last, but the 30th of September, I had over here, we hosted the two architects who are restoring Notre-Dame.
Oh.
Philippe Villeneuve.
Oh, man. I can't believe I missed that.
Remy Fournot or something.
Yes,
Like that. Anyway,
yes.
Philippe and Remy, awesome guys.
Yes.
They were here in D.C. At Catholic U doing a program.
Oh.
And it somehow is, hey, they're here. I went to their program, their talk. Anyway, one thing led to another. They came and visited us that Friday, and I took them all around.
Oh, nice.
Oh, it was awesome. These guys are a hoot. They were awesome guys, really cool guys.
What comparisons did they make, like with what they saw versus Notre Dame?
I took them around. I showed them, our scaffold where we're doing the earthquake repair. I took them out on our gutters, and the roof. But what I really wanted them to see, and I spoke to them about, we were standing. It was cool to be with them standing down on our crossing platform, looking up at our main crossing vault, which is the one that collapsed at Notre Dame.
Yes, it is.
Well, actually, it was that one and the ones
the big
off.
one, and there's a few partial
Exactly.
sections.
Pretty much it's like our main vault and then the first vault of our north transept, the first vault of our nave.
Yeah.
Those also were pierced.
Yes.
So I took them in there, looked up, I was like, yeah, so, this would be your main vault that collapsed. And they're like, yes. So I took them up and we walked on top of our vaulting. They were just all over it.
Yeah.
They were just all over it. So that was really cool. And of course, we were looking at our roof structure. Of course, our roof structure is steel.
Yes.
They're going back with wood. They're going to rebuild with wood.
Yes.
But no, it was just great walking, and they couldn't believe, our vault. It's like, the real thing, isn't it? They're like, yep,
Okay, all right. So actually, this leads into a question that I had prepared much later. One detail that gets left out in a lot of books about vault construction is that, of course, you've got the ribs made of the large blocks of limestone, and it's all placed on the wooden or whatever material you're using for your framework.
Yeah, the centering, they call it.
And then you have your little bits of stone to build the webbing on the lagging.
Or the infill, we call it infill, yeah.
But one detail that often seems to get left out is the vault is all held together by a large pour of concrete, right? Is there large concrete pouring all over our vaults?
No. Actually, only section of vaulting on this cathedral that has a concrete pour on top of it is the far east end, the apse, the first vaulting they built. You stick your head in through that door on the east end and look above our choir vaulting, it's just limestone.
Okay.
And it's the same case, the south transept, north transept, and the nave. They parged over the nave and the north transept. They put a thin parge coat of mortar over it. But no, there's no structure of concrete above except our far east end.
Interesting.
Which, again, I think is part of that theory of the apse may not have needed those 6 freestanding. What do you got, the Macaulay book?
Yeah. So I honestly, maybe Macaulay gets it wrong.
It's been a while since I've seen the book.
So in the book, he talks about, of course, you build the wooden framework, you build your ribs out of the blocks of limestone, then you have your filling with your small bits of limestone. Right. But then he goes into great detail about how you then the mortar is set, a 4-inch layer of concrete was poured over the entire vault.
Yeah, I've seen that on some of the medieval cathedrals, Yeah, so there is a shell.
So sometimes it was done, but not always.
No, ours doesn't. Ours doesn't have it. Ours is just the limestone.
It's not necessary.
It's not necessary because it's still under compression. Yeah, but now I remember that and I've seen that. I've been up on vaults in European cathedrals. It seems to me the English cathedrals were very similar to ours. I didn't see that.
Well, English cathedrals just have more ribs like ours does. Like we have, French ribs are actually rather plain. They only usually have the 4 piers connected.
Yeah, where we have multiple, coming up in there. Yeah. So, that's interesting. I'll take you out there one day. But anyway, Remy and Philippe were quite intrigued by that. So anyway, they really thought this cathedral was awesome. They'd never been here.
Okay.
And they loved it. They were very impressed So yeah, we made a cool connection.
It's
with those
always
guys.
neat to see how a small world it is for Gothic enthusiasts.
It is. Yeah, and we have another good connection. There's some folks from York Minster.
Oh yes,
I'm going to host them here in December.
Mm-hmm.
The young woman who's one of their project managers and they're head of their works department. They're really cool.
I know at York Minster, they're doing a big project where they're trying to protect a lot of their stained glass with
that's right.
extra panels of like sort of weather resistant stuff.
Yeah, that's a big thing that's out there in the stained glass world, whether to do the exterior, protective glazing. There's the, schools of thought both ways. And
right.
So anyway, we're not looking at that.
Yeah, I think they're trying to decide what to do at Notre-Dame right now. Do they do that as well?
Yeah.
So a little bit, actually, I had a couple questions about the mortar. Is replacing mortar just a regular process that happens in the life of a cathedral, regardless of big earthquakes?
Yeah, I mean you look at the way our cathedral's built, or any big stone building. The stones are bedded down in a bed of mortar, but unlike when you lay brick or block, you finish the mortar joint off right to the edge of the brick. Whereas this big heavy stonework, you lay the blocks of stone, you spread the mortar bed, but you keep the mortar raked back about an inch or so from the face of the stone.
Okay.
Which is, and you don't want to pack that mortar into the edge. Again, it's all to do with settlement. And as you're building these massive stone, this is not, a little house or something, of course. This is, these massive thousands of tons of stone. You don't do the final tuck pointing, the final mortar, until you're coming down after you've built the structure, which allows things to kind of settle.
Yeah.
And that's the way it's always been done. So you always keep the mortar raked back when you're building the structure. So this central tower, for instance, or any part of the cathedral, they started, laying those big blocks and working their way up, and when they finished, then you do the final cleaning of the stone, because, the stone's dirty, you have mortar streaks and stains, so you're cleaning and tuck pointing with a different mortar. Typically, you want to use a slightly softer mortar for that final inch, 3/4 of an inch of joint, again, to allow for movement in the building. Now,
because you want the limestone to be safe, and if something has to go, the mortar should take the
mortar
brunt.
should always be the sacrificial
right.
part. Although, again, see, now this is where it gets a little weird sometimes on this building. This is a modern 20th century structure. And what was around at the beginning of the 20th century, it was the beginning of the widespread use of Portland cement mortar. Up until the late 19th century, mortar was the lime mortar. That the Romans invented.
Yeah.
And the predominant mortar that was used in laying any kind of bricks or stones, cathedrals, whatever, was a lime-based mortar where they took crushed limestone, pulverized it, and then cooked it in a kiln. And that became the cement that you added to the sand. And then the chemical reaction that makes it get hard. But the thing about lime mortar was always soft. And then around the late 19th century, maybe the 1880s, is when Portland cement was invented, which was a whole different chemical process. In other words, it made your mortar a lot harder.
Okay.
Which, like, for concrete was a good thing.
Yeah.
And, there's nothing wrong with it. But it went from, in the late 19th century, from this lime-based mortar that had been around for centuries to Portland cement mortar. Man, this stuff is great. It gets hard. The harder, the better.
So it can actually inadvertently damage limestone?
It could. And what's interesting about this building, especially on the older parts of the cathedral, the apse, the choir, the north transept. So stuff that started from 1907 to the 1930s.
Yeah.
The mortar used on the construction of those parts of the cathedral was a very Portland cement rich mortar. So very hard. And the recipe, I found the specification with the mortar mix when they were building the apse. And I have it. I still have a copy of it. It's from 1916. It says, "The mix shall consist of 2 parts sand, 1 part Portland cement, white Portland cement, and 1 part lime." So 2, 1, and 1, that is a hard, you ask any mason,
Yeah.
that is a hard,
Okay.
hard mortar mix.
Okay.
And I think the thinking was back then, I even was me working, when I started the masons, the old masons, I mean, it was harder was always better. Oh, it gets hard. That means it'll last a long time. Well, you do start to see more cracking in the walls because of that.
Oh, boy.
However, the one saving grace here on the cathedral, what really damages, especially it's the older historic buildings. Like you get these, like here in this country, like colonial era buildings,
Sure.
right? The old houses in Georgetown or Old Town that were built, those old brick homes that were built in colonial times, the brick were laid in lime mortar. But then come the 1900s or whatever, when it came time to repoint your old brick house,
Yep.
they cut out that soft lime mortar and repointed it with the hard Portland mortar.
Right.
That's when you have problems, when your hard outer mortar is harder than the softer inner mortar.
Okay.
And even, and I saw examples of that in Europe, in the UK. I remember visiting Salisbury and Canterbury, and in the early 90s, I was at Salisbury Cathedral, and they were doing a big restoration of their spire.
Yes.
And being up there with the masons and seeing the damage that the hard mortar caused to the, ancient medieval stonework
Oh, that's a tragedy.
that was laid. Oh, and it's, you walk around, you see the damage. You'll see the mortar deteriorates the stone, and then if the stone moves, it breaks. But I would point out things, and I remember the mason I was with, he's like, yeah, those bloody Victorians and their Portland cement mortar.
Well,
Yeah.
it's amazing how many restoration projects have happened over the years that had good intentions, but really made things worse.
Nothing against. I mean,
Yeah.
they thought, they're like, wow, this is great, this is hard. But even here at this cathedral, I found a memo, and I still have it in my files, written in the 1950s when the South Transept was being built by Philip Froman, the architect, who he mentioned the cracking and the damage that the hard mortar had caused on the eastern end of the cathedral. So it was right around the 1950s where they changed the mortar mix recipe to a slightly softer mortar.
Yeah.
Things evolve. And nowadays, what we're using, for instance, in a current project here on this south side of the nave, they've really come a long way with restoration mortar. So we use I think I showed you that.
Yeah, I think you did.
Yeah, I did. We're doing the repointing of the buttresses. And there's companies out there now that make a ready mixed restoration type custom color mortar. And it's great stuff. And you're not relying on, the guy who's, 3 shovels. Was that 3 or 4 shovels of sand that I just threw in there? Oh, well, let me throw a little extra cement in there because I forgot how many shovels of sand I threw in here. And that part, we're using some really good materials now for the restoration work, I think.
Well, and again, all the mortar, what's it called? Mortar, when you reapply it? It's repointing. When all the mortar repointing that you showed me, again, that was all related to earthquake damage.
No, not all.
Oh, not all?
No.
Okay.
I mean, one good thing about this earthquake, the elaborate scaffolding that we have to build to get to the work enables us access to areas. So why not repoint the entire wall,
right,
the entire buttress? It needs it anyway.
So this is kind of getting to my question. Like the cathedral on a regular lifetime basis just needs it to be done regardless.
Yeah, we were doing that before the earthquake. But now with the earthquake, so if you start, if you look at the cathedral now since the earthquake, if you start here I always like to start on the north transept facade.
Yeah.
And the north transept pinnacles. I mean, we did all that in 2016. Mm-hmm. And in 2017, we actually jumped to the west towers. There were just 2 pinnacles on the west towers that needed work. But then in 2017, we also dismantled that big southwest transept pinnacle.
Oh, that huge one.
2018, we did the garth, the north side of the choir and the east side of the north transept. Repointed, repaired. 2014, 2015, that was actually the first earthquake repair. That was the flying buttresses of the apse.
Yes.
So 14, 15 apse, 16 north transept, 17 west, 18 garth, 19, we were not on the building doing any earthquake repairs. However, we were doing a lot of carving of stones that we put back on the building in 2020, the year of COVID. We were on that south side of the choir.
Yep.
2021, we did a couple of buttresses here on the south transept, and here we are in 2022. So pretty much everything's been repointed and cleaned and repaired, starting on this north transept, going all the way around the apse.
I mean, that's the way these catastrophes are, right? When the earthquake happens, it's a tragedy in some ways, but it's an opportunity in so many other ways.
An opportunity, whoa, without a doubt, to get up there and
ever more so at Notre-Dame with the fire, a terrible tragedy, but the cathedral is going to look better than it ever has before when they're done.
Right. I mean, they've removed all their stained glass windows, and now we haven't. People ask me this all the time. Oh, did the stained glass windows sustain damage in the earthquakes? Like, no. As a matter of fact, no, not at all. Because think about it, all the stained glass windows are inside of one of the cathedral's very stout walls. And the top of the stained glass window is a Gothic arch.
Yeah.
So that energy just went right up through all that.
And it's like a soft lead, I think.
Yeah, and the windows, they kind of float in there. So no, the windows were untouched by the earthquake. Now, again, with having all that scaffolding in front of the windows, we were able to reglaze some of them, reputty them, clean them. On the interior, when we did all the interior work, the ceiling repairs in 2014 and 15, the windows all got washed. They were filthy. Just literally a bucket of water and a sponge. The guys would just wipe the windows down with water and a sponge. And after a few wipes, the water was black.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was a good silver lining.
Absolutely.
To everything. Yep.
Well, I think my last really earthquake-related question, don't worry, I have more.
No problem.
My last earthquake-related question is the cathedral, when all the work is done, after all the restoration has been taken care of, will the cathedral be a more earthquake-resistant cathedral than it's been?
Oh, absolutely it will be, because of the seismic, as they call it, our engineers like to call it, seismic upgrades.
Yeah.
That we're doing again. And that's the drilling through every pinnacle that we dismantle with a 3-inch diameter hole going down 20, 30 some feet.
Sure.
With the stainless steel rod in there.
Yeah.
And the rod going all the way up through.
Not exactly a medieval technique, but important.
Well, but still not really. All of them had, even these, we had little bronze pins between the stones that were used for alignment, but you can't tell. It's, all hidden inside.
Well, and when the earthquake first happened, and we all got to see the damage, especially when we were all up in the central tower, again, us ringers, for the first time, and we took a look in particular at that south transept and its terribly rotated pinnacles.
Pinnacle, yeah.
It never occurred to me that really, it's just blocks of stone sitting on top of each other. Like, it's not like there was some complex jigsaw puzzle holding those things together. It's just like flat, flat, block of stone, block of stone, block of stone.
Block of stone, yep.
Is that going to be that way, or will there also be a rod holding those together?
Our engineers are finalizing their strengthening design. Yeah, that's southwest. Now, that southwest turret pinnacle and the southeast of the south transept here, those are actually very complex pinnacles, the way they're put together.
Sure.
Most of our pinnacles, like you say, are very simple. It's just stack, 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 stack.
Right.
Whereas these have some really complex shapes.
Okay.
The way they were put together. It's still
I was referring to like the very top of it.
Oh, yeah, the very top is still stack, 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 stack. But the midsection where those heads of the prophets are carved, really complex. And the pinning and strengthening system that they're coming up with is quite complex for that.
Definitely. For this 25th episode of Cathedral Talk, we are briefly switching gears and asking you, dear listener, to donate to the Preservation Fund for Washington National Cathedral. Repair work and restoration has been ongoing at the National Cathedral since the 2011 earthquake, and as you now have heard, much work yet remains to be done. If you go to our website at cathedraltalk.fm, you will find a special link on our homepage to support Washington National Cathedral, which takes you to the page where you can donate to help repair the earthquake damage. Also, please check the box at the bottom of the donations page for WRS/Cathedral Talk Podcast so that we know you made your donation on the behalf of our podcast. We rely on the enthusiasm of our listeners to show support like this to encourage us to make more episodes. Thank you for your contributions, and thank you for enjoying our show. So I just have some questions that have been on my mind for a long time about stone and limestone. The cathedral here, Washington, is built out of Indiana limestone. And I take great pride in that because was born in Bloomington, Indiana. So it's nice to know that my hometown really had a contribution to this building that I love. Again, I'm just curious, why limestone and not other kinds of stone? Why not build out of granite or sandstone? And some cathedrals are. What is it about limestone that is your building material of choice?
And as are most cathedrals, in Europe.
This they are, yes.
I think it became pretty evident early on. I mean, granite is an awesome stone, but my God, is it hard.
And heavy, right?
And heavy. And especially back in the day, it was whatever the local stone was. Notre-Dame, right? That stone came from not too far up the river, right?
Yep.
In the UK, you had the Portland limestone that was the limestone for many of the English cathedrals.
Yes.
Although Canterbury is built of Caen limestone.
Oh, okay.
From France.
I think St. Paul's is Portland, if I remember correctly. But all different kinds of limestone.
But no, so limestone here, Indiana limestone. Again, when this cathedral was started by the, late 19th century, the limestone mills in Indiana were going gangbusters. It was, right around after the Civil War that the limestone quarrying operations in Bloomington, Bedford.
I've seen the movie Hoosiers many times with the quarrying scenes.
And breaking away. And
breaking away. Yeah, you caught me.
Right. But,
I'm a Hoosier and I got that wrong.
So, by 1907, the local stone here in D.C. was Aquia Creek sandstone. Mm-hmm. And that's what the White House is built out of, the U.S. Capitol or the early part of the Capitol and many other early, 18th and early 19th century D.C. buildings, because that was our local stone that they were able to float up from down there, down Aquia, their way and south on the river.
Right.
But even that, once Indiana limestone became available in quantity, the builders were in the masons. So Indiana limestone is, very high quality. And the grade of limestone that we use on this cathedral, call it either select or premium buff.
Okay.
So it's the higher grade of Indiana limestone. So it's just a wonderful building stone. It has very good compressive strength. It's a strong stone, yet it's relatively soft enough where you could carve it into incredible things that you see on this building. So
it's very versatile, basically.
Right. It's the best of both worlds. Very versatile for good building stone and a good carving, cutting stone.
But it's not that it's one kind of limestone throughout the whole building, right? I think I remember reading that usually in vaults, you try to use lighter, more porous limestone.
Our limestone, I from what I see, it's pretty much consistent.
Is it really?
The same.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're up close in our vaulting, it's pretty much, it looks to me like the same grade all the way around. Yeah.
I think one of the recent discoveries at Notre-Dame was that they did use different kinds of limestones in their vault. And when the firefighters dumped all that water on those vaults, they're so porous that they sucked up all that water and it threw off the weight balance of the building.
It did, yeah. I remember reading about that and seeing that. Yeah. And Remy and Philippe talked about that in one of their presentations. But no, we're pretty much the same limestone all the way through. And again, this Indiana Select premium material that we use is just fantastic. And there's so much of it, even though this cathedral was built over 83 years, there's no one single hole in the ground in Indiana that says, Washington National Cathedral. They do have, I've seen it, it's called the Empire Quarry.
Oh, okay.
It was all of the limestone for the Empire State Building.
All from one place.
Came out of one quarry.
Interesting.
And it's still there. I think it's flooded now.
I had almost forgotten the Empire State Building was Indiana limestone too.
Yeah. And it was, now the Empire State, wasn't that built in like some ridiculous 3 years?
Oh, yeah.
In 3 years in the early 1930s.
Yeah.
It was fast, I remember. So it all came out of one hole. Here, this cathedral, many different quarries, even though it's those two counties, basically, Bedford and Bloomington.
Right.
So that's the beauty of Indiana limestone. Also, you can get it out of different quarries in the same area. And right now, they're cutting up a block of limestone for me right now out here in Vienna, Virginia, for some big finials for the central tower.
Is there a normal supply line where like you can expect a certain number of blocks per month or something?
Yeah, the guy we use a guy literally out in Vienna, Virginia. He's got a stone mill and he gets some really nice Indiana limestone. And he's got a 22-ton block that we purchased because it's one of the last really good blocks of this premium buff. And I want to use that for these central tower finials.
Yeah. Because
what happened, the quarry that he's been getting this limestone out of, it's the biggest underground limestone quarry in Indiana. And it flooded a few years ago.
Oh, okay.
And they've got to pump all the water out of it. So he's got one of these blocks left. So
it's going to take a while.
I was able to convince the powers that be, Charlotte, thank you, Charlotte, our CFO, for letting me buy this block of limestone.
Before it's too late.
Before it's too late. So anyway.
And I'm more on limestone too. Check my facts on this because I'm curious about how limestone weathers. Does limestone, while it has all the advantages we talked about, its versatility and, it's strong, but it's also carvable and,
all of that.
Yeah. But does it weather more than like granite, for example? And is that a problem for the structure?
Yeah, all you have to do right now, you see your little balcony here at the tower. I mean, you could feel the inside of that block, right? It's been indoors all these years, and then immediately go outside.
Well, we're not talking just about natural weather, too. We're talking about like pollution and stuff, right?
So look at how that block has weathered over the last 60 years in this case. But our cathedral, limestone weathers naturally. I love the way it weathers, and I love that patina that it gets, that little rough.
I like the look of it too.
Yeah. That rough, with the weather. And here's an interesting thing. Back in the early 80s, the cathedral had a study done. A material scientist, gentleman who I know, Mr. Livingston was his name, but he was a material scientist that worked for the Bureau of Standards or something. But anyway, he spent about a year on this cathedral. Because at the time, they were looking at, so how is this cathedral weathering? How is it, the acid rain or pollution and all this? So he spent about a year he built these catch devices on like the sloped surfaces of the cathedral.
Yeah.
And he's had several of these. I have the report still. It's pretty fascinating
I'd love to read.
So he spent a year or so on this building collecting rainwater samples that hit the limestone of this building and were collected. He measured erosion rate, of the limestone. And, his conclusions were, and again, it kind of makes sense. You think about it. We live here in D.C., it's not a heavily industrialized region.
Yeah.
It's not like Pittsburgh. I mean, I've been to Pittsburgh. You see some of the old limestone buildings there.
Yeah.
They're a mess from back in the day.
Right.
When the mills were going. But our limestone, in a nutshell, his conclusions were the limestone of this cathedral is weathering at the rate of 2 to 4 millimeters per century.
Oh, okay.
I think he said 2 millimeters per century.
Okay. So not nothing, but pretty slow.
Pretty slow. And the rain, he was measuring, catching the rainwater as it would hit the limestone and, get caught, and he would measure, sediment. But he was also measuring the pH of the rain.
Yeah.
And the rain, this was already now, back in the late 80s. The rain falling in D.C. at that time was not particularly acid.
Well, we're pretty lucky to have clear skies in D.C. We've got not that much industry around here.
Exactly. So right now, the cathedral is weathering naturally. Mother Nature, who's to say that could change? And here's the other thing limestone will do. Limestone will get we use a slang term, like either we'll call it like a crust or a bark.
Yeah.
Like when you look at that weathered stone on the outside, when you feel that rough, that roughness is a crust or a bark that'll form. Another old limestone guy in Indiana, he was actually a geologist. He was telling me that limestone, he called it a case hardening. Like
so does it protect it a little bit?
Yes, it
so
will.
It reduces
and
the
you'll see,
erosion.
Like, when you're cutting it, especially like Andy and Sean, our carvers will pick up on it. Like if you're cutting through a piece of the old outside weathered stone, they'll feel that little bit of the bark.
Yeah.
The crust that they have to cut through to get to the not softer, but you know what I mean? So there's a little, I like the case hardening.
The analogy works quite well.
Yeah. So it's all good in that respect.
So, I mean, that number you gave me from that research, the gentleman
2.4 millimeters.
I wonder if that stays consistent, or does that number reduce as the bark builds?
I wonder. Yeah. But so that's kind of a little interesting tidbit. And there was another gentleman here back in the 90s. He was a science teacher at St. Albans. Great guy. He did some experiments on his own, and he came up with similar conclusions. We actually they're still on the roof of the West Towers. Mm-hmm. We cut, that was with Bruce, the teacher from St. Albans.
Sure.
We cut little discs of limestone, and we have them still sitting on the roofs of the West Towers at flat, 45-degree angle, 60-degree angle. And then some of them I coated with, they sell all sorts of sealers and coatings for stone, which we don't use here. That stuff, the verdict isn't in on that stuff yet anyway.
Right.
It doesn't matter. You have to reapply it.
Yeah.
But I remember applying some of this stuff to these samples, and, you can see a little difference, but now it's been 30 years and it's all gone.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see how these little samples of stone are weathering up there on our little experiment. I still go up there and check them out every so often.
And so it would take a long time for weathering and erosion to structurally threaten the building.
Right. And you're not going to see, you go to the European cathedrals and you see how some of that stone looks like it's, melted.
It's been eaten away for hundreds and hundreds of years.
And hundreds. So right now we're doing okay.
And for example, our flyers on our buttresses, they're pretty robust. Whereas some of the European flying buttresses are very thin stone.
Oh yeah, and the stone is just compromised. So no, we're good right now.
Yeah.
Yep.
So in other words, Washington National Cathedral will remain standing for a long time, assuming there's no earthquakes, for hundreds of years if you just left it there.
Absolutely think so. Yep.
Yeah. One of the, quirks about when they've done some research about Gothic cathedrals in Europe is that on occasion they'll find random tidbits of metalwork that are holding them together. For example, at the Cathedral of Amiens in France, it's the largest Gothic cathedral in France. It's so big that its central piers were insufficiently bulky to resist the thrust of the side aisle arches.
Right, and they bowed
in.
Yep.
And it got so bad, and I think it was like the 1500s or something, that they, as an emergency measure, had to install these giant iron chains that run along the lateral parts of the triforium.
I've not been there, but I've seen that. That's what you're talking about in photos. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Now, that's a much taller and a little bit more risky cathedral than ours is here. Is there any bits of metalwork that are important holding this place together, or nothing like that?
No, we don't have any metal bracing holding. At the top of this central tower, we've got the intermediate pinnacles.
Yeah.
The 8 intermediate pinnacles that are in the center.
Yeah.
So there's 2 on each wall. So the intermediates, if you look up, you can see the framework of scaffold holding them together because they rotated so severely. But when we dismantle that and put them back together, there was never any sort of reinforcing structure, metal banding, whatever you want to call it.
We had the luxury of learning from our forebears who built the old ones, and we built a little bit more sturdy here. We have very thick central columns here that are holding up
the piers in
tower.
Here. And I think, the brickwork that you see here inside of the piers, and then later we went to a concrete fill. It's really doing the job.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking about the central tower and the the chambers above and below, that there were some beams. Are those I-beams, or is that other kinds of stone too?
Where's that?
I could have remembered. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I thought you had mentioned that you could see some beams crossing some of the ceilings at some point in the level in the tower. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Other than the concrete beams. That's
maybe that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
it was a concrete beam.
Yeah, the concrete beams that are poured.
Okay.
When you go up here, you see them. That's what I mean by the beams.
The beam concrete beams.
Yeah, the concrete beams.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I don't know if they had concrete beams in the Middle Ages, but it's definitely not.
I remember going up the Bell Harry Tower at Canterbury.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of this tower. Well, actually, Canterbury Cathedral,
it's a very similar profile.
If you look at it from a certain angle, it really does remind you of this one.
You have to do a double take just to make sure.
Right, but their Bell Harry Tower, again, proportionately, it's not as stout as this, but their roof decks, I remember going up in there with one of the masons. The decks are they're wood.
Yeah.
Just wood.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And then Salisbury, of course, you go up into the spire. It's got that insane framework.
Yeah.
Wood, inside the spire.
I had actually not realized that Salisbury's spire was masonry too. That had not registered in my brain that it was
massive stonework on the exterior, but then it's got this interior massive timber frame. And then, Salisbury doesn't have a crypt level built on grade.
We were talking about foundations earlier. It's amazing how many various kinds of foundations all these cathedrals have. We have the giant concrete footprint here. Salisbury basically has a bit of gravel.
And then a lot of the others are built on the ruins of the old Norman crypt.
Right.
Right.
And then there's the famous story of Sir Christopher Wren having to choose between clay and sand for St. Paul's. He chose clay, and it turned out to be the wrong choice because St. Paul started to settle too much and sink too much. And if you actually take a triforium tour in St. Paul's, you can see that some of those windows start to go into weird, odd points to correct the issues.
You can see it. I can point it out. Yeah, in the rare book wing and the northwest wing, those two little wings, those west towers settling over the years just took those little wings with them.
Yeah.
And you can see some funky stuff if you look closely in that northwest and rare book wing.
And we were talking about metalwork a moment ago, and I think one of the recent discoveries, at least according to the news I've been reading, at Notre-Dame, again with the restoration from fire repair, is that it revealed when the roof burned off that there was metalwork holding the top of the stone roofs along the nave.
Oh, wow.
Just where the roof was sitting on top of the nave.
Right.
And in fact, they think that metalwork was put there when they decided to raise the roof a bit a few hundred years into the life of the cathedral. But it probably really saved the building to a great extent because it made sure that those stones didn't move as the roof collapsed right on top of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah, I look at those pictures of that roof burning, and
it was a day to remember.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And speaking of the central tower again, which we're sitting in right now, which is my ringing room, my favorite place here in the building. This was the first of the three towers built at Washington National Cathedral. I think it was dedicated in the 60s.
Ascension Day, 1964.
1964. There's actually two sets of bells here. We have the carillon below, and then we have the peal bells, or the change-ringing bells, to the ropes for which we're sitting in the room right now. And they were used for services in Washington National Cathedral because the cathedral operated for many years while it was under construction still. The West Towers, which were again built much later in the 80s, and you finished in 1990, I took one tour in those towers, and I think they're pretty much void, right? There's nothing in them.
They are. There's nothing in them other than a couple of decks, but not even decks.
Yeah.
They just built the beams.
I mean, there's louvers that give the illusion of there's probably something there, but they're empty.
On the Southwest Tower, we have the antennas. So if you go down a couple of levels, there's a level there with all the repeaters, from all the various folks who have their antennas on our roof, which is a source of revenue.
So if Washington National Cathedral wanted to get competitive and win the Guinness Book of World Records for most bells in a cathedral, we could theoretically fill those towers with more bells if we wanted, right?
You could. I know structurally they could probably handle it because, those beams in there, the construction is pretty darn stout.
Yeah.
But the whole thing with the West Towers, I mean, Yeah, they didn't have, unlimited funding, and they wanted to get them built.
Yeah.
So it was just, you could always pour more decks inside. You've got the beams.
Right.
Yeah, you can do that. But yeah, they're there. Who knows? I mean, we've got a lot of hundreds of years here. If someone wants to do something with the insides of those towers, they got plenty of time.
I think I remember, doesn't a part of the roof on the central tower here, it can be removed by a crane to put bells inside?
Yeah, there's a removable hatch on the roof of this tower, which is how they brought I believe that's how they brought the peal bells in, because the tower crane was up there. I know the Carillon, they rolled them in through an opening.
Well, I assume that this circle probably comes up too.
That would come up too, because the crane came up through this circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mast of the crane.
Because you have to get to the Carillon below us, but then you still have to get through the ceiling above us for the change of bells too.
Right. So theoretically, this is all removable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know the one up there is. Yeah.
It's not unheard of, but it is relatively uncommon for a big cathedral to have its bells in the central tower rather than the west towers. Usually it's more common to have them there, but we chose at National Cathedral to build this one first and have faith that the funding would come to eventually build the rest.
That's why I think it was the right call, right? You know the story, the Dean Sayer, the bishop wanted the nave built so we could have more people in the building and have bigger services. And the dean said, no, let's build the tower. Then it'll put us on the skyline and the tower will build the rest of the cathedral. Anyway.
Yeah. So I'm just on to some of my more nerdy questions here. So I hope you'll humor me for just a moment.
Sure.
One thing that has been on my mind a lot, again, with the restoration at Notre-Dame and, of course, watching the earthquake repairs here, too. It's always hard to judge by monetary figures with inflation and, how much things cost, and comparing how much it cost to build the cathedral in 1907 versus how much it costs in 2022. I have this hunch, and I may be wrong, and please correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I have this hunch that it seems like restoring a building faithfully, like doing all the, restorative practices of making sure things are authentic and rebuilding it after a massive event like the earthquake or the fire. It seems like restoring a building is a lot more expensive than just building a new one. I'm curious if you have some insight on that. If, for example, they raised $1 billion for Notre-Dame, a lot more than we have.
A lot more.
And I get some reports that it might not be enough. They might need more than that. Washington National Cathedral, again, it's really hard to do some comparisons based on inflation, but the official website for Washington National Cathedral states it costs $65 million to build Washington National Cathedral. Now, again, how do you adjust that from 1907?
Well, that number, I remember where that number came from. Back when that figure came out, back when we finished the cathedral in 1990, the $65 million, what I heard is they just took all of the construction contracts from 1907 to 1990 and totaled it up.
Yeah, so that's not adjusted for inflation at all.
Yeah, and then adjusted and all. I remember Tony Segretti, our architect at the time, at 1990, he said that would translate to about $450 million.
Okay.
Half a billion.
So $500 million, yeah. And I mean, you were telling me earlier about how much has been raised for earthquake repairs. It's like 35 or something.
38. Yeah, it's still cheaper to do what we're doing.
Okay.
We're not rebuilding an entire flying buttress.
Sure.
We're not rebuilding and vaulting.
Yeah.
Notre Dame. Rebuilding a vault.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah.
That's,
when was the last time somebody did that?
Yeah, that's here.
Yeah. That's probably why they were so excited to visit. When they came, they see the most recent vault built on Earth.
No, actually, you think about it. After the Second World War, after the First World War, you had cathedrals that were destroyed, and they did rebuild the vaults.
That's true.
But still, rebuilding, especially that main vault of Notre Dame, I think it's bigger than our central vault.
It's a big place, and it's not a square. It's a weird angles and all sorts of
how they're going to do that, and it's. That's going to be quite an undertaking, rebuilding a vault. I'll stick with our pinnacles, although the top of this central tower is going to be a huge challenge.
Maybe they'll come visit again just to take some more notes.
We're hooked up now.
Can you invite me next time they come? Because I want to tag along.
Yeah, that was really cool. That was really cool. I'll have to show you some pictures.
Oh, please do. And so Notre Dame is on a whole different level with how much work they have to do. And again, maybe I'm just misinterpreting the numbers as they come. But like when I hear like, oh, we've raised $1 billion, right? It seems like you might be able to just build a new cathedral like without having to worry about all the historical accuracies if you just, oh, we got $1 billion to
For
build
$1 billion,
one.
you could probably build another copy of Notre-Dame. But yeah.
But to actually faithfully, okay, we're going to catalog all the fallen stone and we're going to
use what we can.
do the historical, like put all the stones back to where they were supposed to go and then retouch all the windows. It just, I've got this hunch like restoration, it's a longer, slower, and I want to have somebody confirm, is it a little bit more expensive on that
The way
level?
they're doing it there, it has to be.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, think about they're getting all those trees from all over France.
Yeah, that's true.
Rebuild their roof.
Holding nothing back.
Yeah. And it's supposed to be ready for 2024 for the Olympics.
Yeah, that's right. I keep waiting for some updates on that because we're getting really close to that. And my hunch, again, I know nothing, but my hunch is that it'll be probably something like we're opening like an aisle for people to come in and look.
I should have asked Philippe that question. But I mean, they could open the interior.
Yeah.
And like we did when we were repairing our ceiling, we had that dance floor built and the entire nave and transepts were open. So you could probably do that there.
It was kind of a unique experience, and you'll never see it that way for a long time because you could see like the stained glass shining on those nets that were hanging in the ceiling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now, I'm not trying to test your loyalty here at all because we all love Washington National Cathedral tremendously, but I think it's fair to say nothing is built perfect. Everything has flaws.
Exactly.
And I'm curious, for example, we have the very cool but odd, buttresses that are detached at the end. Possibly, one could argue they're a design flaw, maybe. Again, that's up for debate.
Redundant or
I'm curious
whatever,
if you had the choice to change how something was built so it's better. Is there anything at Washington National Cathedral that you would be like, you know what? I wish we had done this in the first place.
Yes, I can tell you what I would love to do with this building.
Okay.
The drainage
Okay.
on this building.
Okay.
Not the roofs, but the gutters.
Okay.
You look down and you see a big lead roofs that, work fine. They shed that water. And you've got the gutters, these big ones at the top here, right? The clear story. Our drainage downspout system on this cathedral, if I could change that, I would in a heartbeat. And Mr. Froman, was a genius. I think he improved. I think his design is an improvement of the original Bodley Vaughan. Mm-hmm. He took it to the next level. It's beautiful.
Right.
The proportions, you can't argue the way this building looks. Everything's just brilliant. The drainage system, if you visit the European cathedrals, basically you have the gargoyles, which spout, but then you also
which was not original, by the way. I think that was an upgrade they made several hundred years into like Notre Dame where they're like, oh, there's too much water. How can we get all that water off the roof? Oh, let's use the flying buttresses to channel it.
Right. Yeah. But a lot of, it's simple. You go to a lot of the European cathedrals. You've got the gutters like we do. But what we have, we have the downspouts that you see, right? Those lead downspouts.
Yeah.
But from the floor of the gutter through the masonry wall and then out that dumps into the collector box, you have a cast iron pipe buried in the masonry. And it's not a straight shot. It'll go down and it'll do a 90 and then maybe another 90 inside the wall and then finally comes out and does a 90 into that collector box.
Yeah.
And I think if you look, if you look at any elevation on the cathedral, look at the south side of the nave or the north side of the nave, you see it very orderly, the downspouts in the same spot coming down and then the next ones come down and it looks really nice and orderly. Mr. Froman did that. But in order to do that, they had to run some crazy plumbing buried in these masonry walls. Well, what's happened over the years through movement, settlement, rust, I don't know, these cast iron pipes inside the wall are failing. And we get failure there and you get water in there. And the old days, what you had was an opening, in the wall with a lead pan that just went straight into the collector box. You know what I mean? Just an opening, boom. You know, it's not the most attractive thing, or it might take away from the flow of the architecture.
Yeah.
But it's simple and effective.
Yeah.
And yeah, they got a little too elaborate, in my opinion, with the downspout drainage system.
Okay.
And that's something we deal with a lot here now.
And you have to sort of patch it up here and there.
Yeah. Or, we've had to core drill out things and reroute. Anyway, so that's what I would change.
Well, and of course, I think it's pretty unusual for a cathedral to have an HVAC system because we have air conditioning, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's a nice thing.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, we've got, and that's, we have, that's another good point.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of the Overcroft here, when you walk through the auditorium and then you're walking east, you've got a big mechanical room up above the nave, and you've got air handlers and chilled water and all this. Well, sometimes a pipe will burst up there, and water, right before it was at the Bob Dole funeral.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was a Bob Dole funeral. The condensate line backed up, and all of a sudden, like in a couple hours before the funeral, water's dripping down into the nave.
Oh, no.
From this mechanical room that they stuck up above.
Like right through the vault?
Yeah, right through the vault.
Oh, geez.
And we've had another instance on the West Towers, the first floor. You take the elevators of the West Towers up.
Yeah.
Floor 1.
Yeah.
That's nothing but mechanical space.
Right.
Up there. The massive air handlers and the chilled water that comes for the air conditioning from the chilled water plant down here at the bottom of the hill.
Yeah.
All that. Anyway, there was a pipe burst up there, and the water came pouring through the vaulting over the Human Rights Bay, the north porch there. So here you have a Gothic vaulted building, a true Gothic building, but in many spaces you've got modern HVAC systems, water pipes that could blow at any moment, where you don't have that in some of the ancient.
Yeah, no, and some of the old buildings, if you're hot, you're hot.
You're hot. Yeah, and if
we also have elevators in several places too.
Right. So yeah, that's a little dicey sometimes.
Yeah. You've mentioned, of course, having visited many other cathedrals in Europe, especially Britain and France. Do you have a favorite aside from Washington National Cathedral? One that you
let's say my favorite UK one would be Canterbury.
Canterbury.
I just something about it that's pretty cool there, and the history there.
Kind of feels like a progenitor of us in some ways.
Yeah, and in France, Notre-Dame is Notre Dame, but
I'll take that answer.
yeah, but. I always found Chartres.
Yeah, Chartres is a unique one. Yeah. Have you seen the before and after pictures of Chartres? Because they've done a massive restoration there too. Only in the last 10 years.
See, I was there in the late 90s.
Okay, so then, because it used to be a very dark and foreboding, mystical place with all of its wondrous stained glass, but just in the last 10 years, they've done this massive whitewashing campaign.
Oh, that's right. I heard about that.
And if you look at the pictures, it's a different building. And it's controversial. Like, we actually talked about this on the podcast a long time ago, and I was like, I'm not against cleaning it to make it brighter, but they've gone so far as to make it look like the stone is plaster.
I guess they must have, they called it, and I know in the UK they called it a shelter coat.
Yeah.
Right? Did they paint over like a lime wash or something
in
over
fact, their argument, and again, it's a fair argument, they were trying to recreate the way it once looked long ago.
Long ago in the day, yeah.
And I get it. I understand historical accuracies, but there's some crazy things that the medieval builders would do that I was never aware of. Like, they would paint over the joints of all the stone, and they would paint faux joints.
Yes.
And
to make a different geometric pattern.
Yeah.
And then they would paint the statuary.
Yeah, and it seems like a sacrilege to me. Would that be a sacrilege? Do you be like, aren't the real joints good enough?
Yeah, I know what you mean. And paint the statuary, paint the boss stones. And so, French... Chartres was pretty cool, and also Reims.
Reims. Yes. That's the one of the great four that I haven't been to.
Yeah, that one's awesome too. And then Germany, Cologne is just insane.
That
is just a monster.
We were talking about stone earlier. I think I read that Cologne is so black, not only just because of its proximity to pollution, but I think it's not built out of limestone. I think it's sandstone.
No, it's this weird, volcanic
stone
stone. God, I've seen it. I mean, I was there at the shop. It's this hard, dark gray.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's dark gray to begin with.
I got the impression that the builders didn't realize how dark it was going to be.
Right. Yeah. And then being next to the train station and wars and all that. Yeah. So, and then Spain, I'll tell you, León.
Oh, yeah.
Up north in Spain.
Yep.
León is awesome on the way of Santiago and Burgos.
You think you'll take a trip to Barcelona to see the Sagrada Familia?
I haven't made Sagrada yet. I've been to Spain a few times because I have family there. But yeah, Sagrada, that'll
be a big one.
Insane. Seville, man, that's a monster too.
Yeah, that's supposed to be like one of the biggest.
Yeah. Well, that's I think number 2 in the world after Milan or something.
Actually, that leads into my next question.
Oh, anyway.
Because Washington National Cathedral claims in many publicity statements that Washington National Cathedral is the 6th largest cathedral in the world. As a mathematician, I have to challenge under what metric? And again, maybe you know and maybe you don't. It can't be by height because we're tall.
Is it
we're
just
nowhere near
square footage?
Square footage. We are pretty long. Maybe we're quite long.
I think it's square footage because what is it? Number 1 is St. Peter's.
Yeah.
And that's big. I mean, think of the square footage of that place. It's not necessarily tall, but it's just sprawling, right?
Yes.
I heard St. Peter's, Milan. No, St. Peter's, Seville, Milan, or is it St. Peter's, Milan, Seville?
Some order of that, yeah.
And then Liverpool, St. John the Divine.
Yep.
And here. I mean, St. John the Divine, it's, let's see, and it's still bigger than this one. So it's got to be square footage because they don't have a tower.
Right.
And their west towers are stopped.
Right.
Terminated, stumped off.
Yeah.
But it's still bigger than us. And it is. I mean, you walk inside
We could spend another 2 hours just talking about St. John the Divine.
That place
we'll do that
awesome
sometime.
Too. That place is insane too.
There's no longer construction happening there. Way back when construction was happening at Washington National Cathedral in the 80s and up to 1990, was there any kind of communication or dialogue going on with the builders in New York?
Yeah, we knew the builders there and some of the carvers that worked there. Yeah, but then they made the conscious decision to just stop building it and we're going to focus on our programs, right?
Sure.
I was like, that's fine.
Again, makes me a little sad inside, but I get it. Yeah.
But anyway,
well, and then. Again, I mentioned I'm a math teacher here in D.C., and I have the ears of many young people. I'd like to ask on their behalf, if one of my students were to express interest in becoming a mason, maybe one day working here, or, on some kind of masonry project, how do you get started as a mason? Well,
in this town, I mean, there's apprenticeships. Washington, D.C. has actually a strong Masons Union with a great apprenticeship program. You could start off, they have good training, and that's the way to learn it here. You learn by doing. DC is a great stone town.
Yeah.
That's where I started my apprenticeship here in the, Stone and Marble Masons Union of DC.
Yeah.
And, there's still apprenticeships, they need people now.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a trade that doesn't get talked about as much as it used to. But it's so neat to see just what wondrous work that can happen here. And if any of the young people I talk to have any questions, I would love to direct them to you sometime.
Direct me, yeah.
Yeah.
We had a young woman, an intern, working with us this summer from there's a school in Charleston, South Carolina, the School of the Building Arts, the American College of the Building Arts.
Yeah.
They have a stone carving program, and she spent a couple months with us here.
Yep.
We're going to have another one this summer. Anyway.
Well, and of course, then working in tandem with the Masons, of course, you have your structural engineers and folks that you occasionally have to collaborate with.
Right. We have a great team. Our engineers are awesome, and
And I mean, this, of course, then prompts the question, too. You've still got a good bit of work left for earthquake repair. One day you'll be done. One day, everything will be fixed.
Well, all of the earthquake
damage will be repaired. That was going to be my question. What happens after the earthquake damage is repaired? What happens next for the work for the Masons?
Even if we finish, all the earthquake work in the next, 6, 7, 8 years, there's more masonry work on this building. We didn't go over every single square inch.
Yeah.
The west towers are going to need repointings at some point. There's parts of the nave on the clear story walls. There's still carving to be done in this building. There's still embellishments. So no, it'll always roof. I'd like to fix those crazy downspouts.
So there'll always be work to be done.
Oh, yes.
It's an ever-continuing project.
Ever-continuing, yep.
The west facade in particular, it's very devoid of a lot of sculpture, isn't it? Because there's a lot of niches there for all sorts of statues, right?
The main west entrance there where, ex nihilo is, the big creation carving. But, you notice there on either side of Adam, there's still 6 statues. And on the east end of the building, all along, there's missing statuary that was never put in.
Mm-hmm.
If you look closely along the buttresses of the south side of the choir and the north side inside the garth, you'll see empty niches. There's just 2 statues in the garth. I heard the story in the 1920s. They were going to do all those statues, and for some reason, those 2 were rejected by the building committee.
Yeah.
And then they halted that whole program. But if you look, when we were up on the scaffold a couple of years ago on that side, the one guy, it's hard to tell from the ground, but his feet are not yet carved. He's like just a square block. You could see where they just said, stop.
It's kind of like one of Michelangelo's prisoners, those statues that are only partially out of the stone. They're kind of encased in the stone.
He's still in there.
Yeah. And again, one of the things I just love about Washington National Cathedral is it's a hybrid of architecture and design from Britain and France.
It is.
It takes like the best of both.
It does. What do you get? You get the length of the British with the height of the French?
Yep.
That's what I've always heard. And it is. Yeah, you could see that.
You open it up for massive stained glass. You have the very elaborate vaults, many more ribs, like an English cathedral.
Yep.
You got the rose windows of the French cathedrals.
We even have a little bit of fan vaulting, not a lot, but a little in Children's Chapel.
Yep. It's a good high Gothic vaulting, which is, again, more elaborate than a lot of French cathedrals.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Our boss stones. The French architects. I couldn't believe all our intricate carving on the boss stones.
I think one of my favorite elements too is the shape of the bases of the piers in the nave, because they're not at all circular. They're compound piers, but they really are diamonds. Because
they really are, and it works.
It works so nicely. The way they bend over, it's a really good looking kind of pier.
It's very, like I say, Frohman was a genius, when it came to that. It's just, everything is so perfect to me,
We talked earlier about, is there anything you would change about Washington National Cathedral? You told me about the drainage.
That's a very practical thing, isn't it?
The one thing that I would change, again, is that, as interesting as those East End flyers and the free buttresses are, it just feels weird to not have an ambulatory or a chevet. It's called.
Right.
I wish we had a nice wraparound aisle that you could walk around that apse and enjoy the space, That's
you're right. You can't do that.
Yeah,
the ambulatory. Yeah, no, you reminded me of that. Yep.
Yep.
I like our outer aisles, that we have. Those work well. And
I remember somebody telling me, and I forget who it was, but I think there was a conscious decision to not have an ambulatory so that you wouldn't obstruct the windows of Bethlehem Chapel. That may be true or not.
Something to do with the light. The windows of Bethlehem. And those windows are spectacular.
They are.
Yeah. And Bethlehem Chapel, if you were to ask me, my favorite interior space of the cathedral, for me, it's Bethlehem Chapel.
It's an intimate space.
Yeah. And then exterior-wise, my favorite exterior part of the cathedral is the south transept.
Yeah.
The facade, I think that's a masterpiece also. Those pinnacles.
I've got a big photo of it covered in snow in my living room.
Yeah. I mean, I helped build the West Towers, so I have a soft spot for the West Towers.
Sure.
But no, the south transept facade is incredible.
Yeah.
And it'll be so cool to be able to rebuild those 2 pinnacles.
I'm looking forward to watching every step of the way.
On that next summer, I hope.
Well, clearly you enjoy working here. Will you just keep working here as long as they let you forever?
That's for sure. I want to finish this thing, hopefully.
Except they'll never be finished, so there'll always be something to do.
Finish the earthquake.
Yes.
I'll be happy to be able, I got the honor of setting the final stone in 1990 up there. I'm looking at it right now, and it would be so cool to help set the final finial back on the central tower.
That'll be great to watch. Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. I really appreciate you sitting down with us for Cathedral Talk, and I really hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah,
this
you
was
were
a
great,
lot of
Tom.
fun.
I mean, you're awesome too. Your questions, and you're a cathedral guy like all of us. So there you go, man.
I am into that sort of thing.
Yeah, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, buddy.
That's it for now. Check out our podcast website at cathedraltalk.fm. There you will find many architectural visuals and Minecraft goodies. Please consider supporting our efforts here today at Cathedral Talk to aid in the restoration of Washington National Cathedral by using the direct link on our homepage to donate to their preservation fund. Remember to check the box at the bottom of the donations page for WRS/Cathedral Talk podcast. Contrary to what you might expect, the National Cathedral receives no federal funding and relies on your support to function and to continue its repairs. Next month, David and Zach will be back off furlough and we'll be back to our usual shenanigans. Thank you for your ears and support. Good day and happy building.